في أكبر الكتب.
Welcome back, everyone. Integrating Real Perspective here, where I review movies and music for my channel. And as you can see, I went through quite a few changes in my life over the last few months. I just moved to a new apartment. I'm living in West Allis now. And, I had some health stuff that I needed to do some maintenance on with regards to, like sleep apnea and also, sinus infections like that were just crazy, really, really, driving me up the wall and requiring me to, also try out some new supplements, which, includes an iron supplement because I have an iron deficiency, which, contributes to my sleep apnea and, my restless leg syndrome too, which is like a secondary symptom of my sleep apnea. But other than that, I'm much happier than I've ever been now, and I'm very happy to have settled down in a city that is surrounded by an eclecticism of stuff that I need, for my, for outlets with my artwork. I'm much closer now to a venue where I read poetry. There's a slam poetry thing that goes on once a month, the last Friday of each month. In this case, it's the second to last Friday because next week is the week of Christmas. And also mental health resources for my autism, since, I'm on the spectrum. It's been this has definitely been you know, the change that I needed because I've now, upgraded my life to a much higher quality lifestyle, much higher quality standard of living for myself. And it's been all the more fulfilling and as far as making me whole. It's it's definitely, I mean, I used to live in Shorewood, of course, anyways, so I've been familiar with Milwaukee County, and now I'm happy to actually be back in Milwaukee County. Um, so yeah, so there's that. That just wanted to, fill you in on my life story. And I feel that the movie that I need to review today, it follows that theme of, emotional support, except, in this case, this movie focuses on a romantic relationship. And, at the moment, of course, I'm still single. So it's, just one of those films that, I watch and I observe the dynamics of what goes on between a man and a woman and, like, I guess just coaches me on what I can look forward to once I do find myself getting into a relationship, even though it is just a movie. But still, it is a very significant movie, and it is one that came out just 4 months ago. Um, that I actually wanted to see in theaters, but you know, August and September, I was busy with moving, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to get out to the movies and see anything on the big screen. But I was finally happy that I could get this film on DVD at Walmart because it's been impossible to find on any streaming platform unless, you want to buy it for $20 on Amazon to stream. And I found it for a nice, neat $15 at Walmart. So the name of this movie is called Together. And this movie was clearly made for poets and musicians in mind. I, of course, am both because it's as much of a love story as it is a body horror film. But really, the film is just a it's it's a very, very poetic manifesto that explores the fine line between codependency and interdependency as far as relationships go. So, if you've ever studied up on attachment types that John Bowlby pioneered, it goes into that a little bit. But the film stars real life couple Dave Franco as Tim and Allison Brie as Millie. Now, these two leads also produced the film together. And clearly, this is a passion project of theirs. And so far, I believe that this is only their second time that they produced together. Because I know the other movie that they collaborated on was 2023's Somebody I Used to Know, which you can only watch on streaming. It's on Amazon Prime. But Dave also produced 2020's The Rental, which starred Allison Brie. And then there was also The Disaster Artist, where both stars were in that one together. And it just so happened to be directed by Dave's brother, James Franco, who is the more titanic brother in the family, the one that's been, getting more press in the media and definitely one that's, stirred up a lot more controversy. But anyways, The Disaster Artist was that movie about Tommy Wiseau, who was the one that starred in, directed, produced, and wrote what was dubbed as the worst movie ever made, The Room, which came out in 2003. Personally, I actually like that movie because it's awful, but in a charming sort of way. So, but with regards to Dave and Allison, these two stars always carried a warm and bubbly presence to them. Whether they were acting together in a movie or whether they were acting separate. They've always been open-minded and holistic about how they approach love and relationships. As a matter of fact, Alison Brie came out as bisexual in 2023, which implies that while she has a happy marriage with Dave Franco, there is the possibility that a poly relationship with another girl may happen down the road in the near future. She was always a very sexual actress, it seems, at least from the fact that my introduction to her was actually her playing opposite Jason Sudeikis in the Will Ferrell produced sex comedy from 2015, Sleeping with Other People. And why is it that I seem to be the only person in a million miles that has seen that movie? That's a really good movie though. Please check out that film ASAP, especially if you're into the sex comedy genre. If if you like No Hard Feelings, then damn it, you have got to go see Sleeping with Other People. Especially if you love Alison Brie, who I have now dubbed the queen of short skirts because oh boy, does she love her short skirts. That tease you just enough to suggest that maybe she's not wearing panties underneath. It's a mystery, yeah. It's the ultimate mystery in the whole new carnal universe. And Dave, on the other hand, has a famous brother who has never been shy about challenging the conventions of intimacy and consent in sexual dynamics and even risking controversy and lawsuits being carried out against him from girls who are, well, sorry to say, prudish and confused about their own values. I mean, look at James's performances in movies like Spring Breakers, or even him playing in a kids movie, playing the title character in Oz, the Great and Powerful, which is, out of the Wizard of Oz universe. Those are just a couple of examples as to how irresistible he can be and also challenging to approach because of how his charisma has been known to come off as manipulative. And you can draw your own conclusions as to whether his actions have been about promoting free love or if there was, in fact, a very dark and malevolent side to his seductiveness, his charm. I really do think that James and Dave are terrific actors, though, in different ways. And the fact that Dave attracted Allison Brie, who they've actually started dating as far back as 2012. I look at Allison Brie and like her role in Somebody I Used to Know, where she played this producer of a TV show that was just about the real life stories of people's sex lives. And then she leaves that behind to go to this nudist resort, in which nudity is perceived more as like a psychosocial dynamic meant to, you know, bring people into a state of vulnerability, so as to show themselves for who they really are, their most honest and most authentic selves. And if she's clearly somebody that was a perfect match for Dave, and that you know boyish, almost Peter Pan charm that he has. And speaking of that Peter Pan type of persona, I will say that that role, that archetype that he's always carried with him, plays well in the movie Together, where he plays the role that he plays in that film is a rock star, who has a traumatized past with his mom, who had a history of mental health issues. And luckily, he has Millie in his life as a mother figure as well as a lover for him. Now, she plays a school teacher, and it's obvious that her her rapport with her classmates is such a great gift for her to be able to help Tim in so many ways because of the fact that, I mean, the poor guy went through such a terrible ordeal living with a mom who, after his dad died, her husband died, she still held on to his corpse because she couldn't bear the fact that he was gone. And, that's how madly attached he was. I mean, she was with him. Literally, this movie dares to question the the centuries long terms such as soulmate or twin flame, which are just labels that are lazily thrown around, especially in the field of psychology and in New Age mysticism. And, it's like this movie actually questions what those terms mean, and that they're not all that glamorous and, love and light and beautiful, not in the not I guess, not in the sort of way that would make it look like a Disney fantasy. But I'll obviously get more into that later as I get deeper into the story. Yeah, but let's obviously focus on the building blocks of the plot one at a time. So now Tim and Millie are at this party, and Millie is trying to propose to Tim because of the fact that they're living very frugally. She couldn't afford a physical ring, so she just like opens her hands up to make this gesture that she's opening up a box that's got a ring in it. And since like I said, they can't afford a wedding, but despite that, her love for Tim is something that transcends the capitalistic setup that weddings usually have, which, often run in the thousands to the near millions of dollars. Now, unfortunately, Tim freezes up and is at a loss for words on how to respond to Millie's proposal. And the thing is that Dave is a dreamer. He believes that he can make a career with his music and that his creativity alone will bring in money. Oh boy. And the thing is that, he's been becoming more and more withdrawn. The more popular he's been getting, a couple of his friends are asking about when his next release is going to be and through what label he plans to put out his new work. And Tim just like um dubious gives a very dubious answer in saying that he plans to self-release it independently, um that he plans to make it an EP, um but his friends are trying to push him to get back onto a major label again because he doesn't have any material that I mean the truth is that I believe he's basically fudging some of these details because he's saying that he doesn't really have any new material, or if he does, it's like very, very modest material. He doesn't even have the motivation or the creative inspiration that he used to have, I guess, and he's just not into it like he used to be yet. He's also at a loss for identity as well. Like it's like literally without Millie, he doesn't really know who he is. But the thing is that this carries over into his relationship with Millie, and during what appears to be like a dream sequence, Millie even points out, "I know that you need me more than I need you." So Millie is such a giving person who gives Tim a home and plenty of space to pursue his adolescent dreams, and she loves so unconditionally. But she's at a loss when coming up with a label to describe her relationship status with Tim. What does she call him? Her boyfriend? Her hubby? My man? What does she actually end up using as the term to describe her relationship status? She calls Tim her boy partner. Her boy partner. It's like she's Wendy and he's Peter Pan. Because that's what poor Tim is. She's he's a mama's boy, but you feel for him, as well as you feel for her too. So there's obviously not a feminist propaganda that's going on here. It's a very very Taoist perspective. Especially when we get later on into the New Age cult that is at the center of this film too. And more about why this is, will come out later with her and Tim when they decide to move out to a home in the woods for a retreat so as to figure out what to do with their marriage, what needs work. Now, it's important to take note of the very beginning of this movie before the title card appears on screen because it ties into the same country woods location where Tim and Millie moved to. So the movie itself starts out with a search going on for this missing couple who disappear off the nature trail. And that's when a mysterious hole is discovered where these two dogs happen upon it. And it leads into this mysterious cave, which contains a pool that the dogs drink from. You know, you think that they're thirsty and they've found themselves a nice little water hole to quench their thirst. But it's when the owner takes the dogs home that strange things happen. These two dogs, I'm going to say they're borderline collies. They fixate on each other and are very, very still, like just gazing into each other's eyes for what seems like forever. But then it cuts to the house. By the way, this is late at night too, where you hear this yelping and crying, and the daughter of the guy who led the search earlier, who led the search for this couple, tells her dad, to check on the dogs that are in the shed outside. So the owner goes out to check on what the disturbance is. And when he goes inside, he looks into the darkness and there's just barely enough light where he's just standing there and staring for a while before, drawing the flashlight up so that the audience can actually see what's going on with the two dogs. And you're just given a split-second flash of what resembles the dog that was taken over by the shapeshifter in John Carpenter's 1982 adaptation of The Thing. In other words, the dog's form has been altered dramatically. The best way that I can describe it is that the heads get stuck and they're trying to pull in different directions, but to no avail. They basically have fused, their bodies have fused together. Like I said, it only lasts a split second just to give the bare minimum of the gruesome details before the ghostly lenticular lens appearance of the title card together appears. So that just cues you in as to what you're going to start seeing unravel when Tim and Millie move out to that same woods area. It doesn't really give exactly where it is. If I had to guess, probably in upper state Maine, perhaps, because I think the film starts off in New York and then moves, further up north to Maine or somewhere. Like I said, the location of the woods isn't clearly specified. So they get settled in, and Millie starts a new job at a bigger school. Tim brushes up on recording some new songs that he plans to perform live with his band. Millie makes friends with the superintendent of the school, Jamie McCabe, and discover that he lives in the neighborhood near where the couple are living. He implies that it's a yellow it's a yellow house and the only other house in the area, meaning that it's pretty remote. It's cool that Damon Harriman plays Jamie because he's way, way different here than he was in House of Wax, which I also happen to have watched fairly recently. That 2005 remake where he played Lester Sinclair, and your introduction to his character was where he plays like this redneck hick fellow with a cleft tooth throwing dead animals into this pit. He's like the nicer of the three brothers that still live in that one town that's off the grid where, everything is made out of wax. And it's interesting because this guy was famous for playing Charles Manson twice in two separate TV serials, I believe. I mean, here it says that he played him in the psychological crime thriller series Mindhunter, and then later in Quentin Tarantino's 2019 movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I gotta see that movie. Gosh. But now you look at him in Together, and he almost seems to resemble Neil Patrick Harris. He just looks he almost resembles the psychologist that Neo goes to see in Matrix Resurrections. I don't know. I just couldn't help but notice the similarity there. Now, prior to the segment where we see the couple settling into their new home in the woods, there is a conversation between Millie and Tim while they're still in bed. This is like a little fugue that bridges the the story of their lives in the city and then their lives as they would carry it out into the country. Yeah. It's that dream sequence that I was talking about earlier, the scene where they're having that conversation in bed, and Millie mentions that, he needs her more than she needs him. Now, at that point in the conversation, okay, so I guess I kind of spoiled it a little bit by saying that this conversation is actually happening while in it, while it happens to be Tim dreaming. Now, in Tim's dream, Millie is pointing out that there are people watching them. Oh, by the way, this was when she was telling Tim, you know, that she wouldn't blame him if he decided to break up with her, if he decided to end the relationship. But of course, Tim completely refutes that altogether and says, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to leave you." So then Millie is pointing out that there are people watching them, and she's instructing Tim to make them go away. But what you see is not a group of people. You see instead this really creepy woman with this strange, almost demented doll-like face with this clownish smile, this thick eyeliner, messy, ragged hair. I mean, even her eyes just look really funny. They mostly look just, like you see the white corneas, but there's just these black pupils and these white beams of light. Um, there's just something really off about her. And this whole scene is drenched in this blue floodlight. She's sitting across in a bed that, facing the couple. And as it turns out, these two beds are fused together, and they are just constantly drawing inwards as if, they were attached to like some Iron Maiden that is like retracting the beds in reverse. So it's almost like, you know, it's almost like you're looking at one bed, or you're looking at like a mirror reflection of the bed that the couple are sleeping in, but it just so happens that the mirror reflection of this bed features this creepy woman in it. And so, as the beds are retracting into each other, Tim tries crawling under the sheets, but then that strange woman comes crawling up underneath him, on top of poor Tim. And that's when he wakes up, and then all of a sudden it's daytime, and they're out in the woods. So this woman is in fact his mother. I'm just going to get that out of the way right now. Well, that's his mother. And she does get brought up a few times throughout the movie. As I had said about Millie, she's the mother surrogate for Tim, filling in this void that he really desperately needed in his life to just keep him from getting swallowed up alive by his own personal neuroses, his own personal mental health problems. And it's only natural considering how she would be his rock to give him roots upon to branch out and start a new union with this woman, to kind of fill in the missing gestalt to the ideal mother that he never had. It also goes to show that Tim grew up being more of a feeling, intuitive type of man. He's definitely not an alpha male. He's not a Tony Stark for sure. You know, he his responsibility in the relationship is that he actually handles the cooking, while Millie is the one who basically helps out. She's his Uber or Lyft driver. She's the transportation that he needs to get around. Because he doesn't have a license. He's got a driver's permit, and he's in his mid to late 30s. Interestingly, um, Dave Franco turned 40 this year. Just thought I'd say that. So, anyways, we get to a critical point in the film where he comes out talking about a recurring dream that he has. But first, there are two critical story events that happen prior to this that I have to bring up. One is where Tim is at the house looking up at this light fixture, and this is after we see them moving in and getting comfortable, and Tim even trying out this new tool, one of those electric saw tools, which has an interesting use later on. So he's at the top of the stairs and he looks at this light fixture, which is leaking water from above. He pulls out the fixture to then reveal that something that looks like a mound of wet cardboard, like a string of wet cardboard, he pulls out of there. It's just like this really, really drenched, icky, mossy crap that, shockingly enough, is a bunch of rats whose bodies are all fused together, similar to the two dogs that I had pointed out at the beginning of the movie. One of them, in fact, is still barely alive and it starts squeaking, though it actually dies out after its last shriek. The second event then is when Tim and Millie are taking a walk on a nature trail near their home and it starts to pour rain really aggressively. And so then Tim ends up falling through a sinkhole into a cave below the ground. Millie comes down after him and they discover some remains of what looks like an old church. There's pews there. There's a bell that's hanging on the crater of the hole that Tim fell through, a bell with a sun engraved on it. Now, this is where he sits down with Millie and talks about his dream. This dream ends up being the first time Millie hears of it, as it comes out basically like a confession that Tim has otherwise kept inside, afraid, you know, afraid, to disclose it to her until now. So as this secret, which has been concealed up till now, is now finally being unveiled, other secrets are coming out. Like when he pulls the lighter out, indicating that he's been smoking again. And I think Millie also lets him know as well that she's been smoking again too. So Tim then starts sharing his dream with Millie. It starts out with him as a child and his father coming to his bedroom to mention that there's a foul smell. And Tim doesn't notice it. Even as his dad comes back again and again, getting increasingly more irritable and angry every time. Finally, it turns out that, surprise, surprise, a dead rat had been trapped inside the overhead light fixture of Tim's bedroom, and the electrical wire had been cooking his corpse slowly over time. So that's when Tim finally starts to notice the smell. That's the first part of that dream, though. There is another part of it, and it's the one where his dad passes away, and his mom, who was overwhelmed with grief due to losing her other half, but instead of letting him go, she digs up his corpse from the graveyard and then takes him back to sleep on her bed next to her every night. Like, she just is absolutely attached to her husband, that she just doesn't know how to move on. And as Millie is listening to this, she's rather surprised that this is the first time that she's hearing about this. But she provides comfort for Tim while they sit by the fire inside the cave. And then during the night, things get really, really weird. First, there's the part where Tim wakes up in the middle of the night and he notices that as he's breathing, the cave is breathing with him, like some felt sense connection where his body and the formation of the cave are one entity. Now, this is a critical turning point in the story because you're with Tim experiencing the earth as a living organism. You see the cave walls and the passage open up to the the passage that's opening up to the surface, expanding and contracting as his breathing deepens and the volume of his breathing gets more and more filtered to appear like you're hearing from inside his lungs. Like his lungs and the cave are one thing. Like you're seeing the inside and the outside of Tim's body world. And they just so happen to be sharing the same space. Like the cave is absorbing his oxygen and then returning it like it itself is a bile lung for that part of the ecosystem. Kind of almost sounds like the director of this film was referencing the spell of the sensuous in a sense. And the next thing you know, Tim looks over to Millie and sees her breathing fast and shallow. And that's when they both wake up. Now, as they wake up, it's like as if nothing serious ever happened. It was, it's like the sun is finally coming through that hole in the top of the cave, and you know, they just look as if they have that expression on their face like, ah, it was just a really bad night, really, really terrible experience with the elements, but we're finally ready to get out of here. Just an inconvenience and something that they could just brush off their shoulders. So the thing is, though, is that as they're getting up and attempting to get out of the cave and go home, Tim and Millie notice that their legs are stuck together. So like his right leg and her right leg are stuck together, almost as if it looks like they were super glued. Oh boy, it looks like there's another House of Wax reference right there. At first, Tim dismisses it as mildew, even though he doesn't know anything about mildew. But then they have to very ever so delicately pull their legs apart and get themselves unstuck. And it does hurt quite a bit. It really feels like, their skin is ripping, but I mean it's really just getting themselves unstuck from that super glue sensation that they're having. And then they do eventually climb out of there and they walk back home again. Now it's at this point this film starts taking a turning point, a very, very supernatural turning point where physical and psychic phenomena happen that the couple end up sharing together. So that was what I just said was an example of something physical, something that happened to their bodies. Now, I'm going to give you an example of something that's psychic, emotional. So there's this one point where Millie is driving off to school. She's going down the dirt road to the freeway and turning onto the paved road to head off to school. And this is where Tim stays at home and takes a shower. But as Millie leaves the house and starts going down all these different country roads, Tim's head starts slamming into the wall of the shower. He starts having this telekinetic empathy with Millie, in which his body starts turning and convulsing at the same rhythm in which Millie is turning inside her vehicle and at the same speed in which the vehicle is driving. And so, after that violent telekinetic episode, Tim decides to go and see a pharmacist. His head is all bandaged up. I think it's even stitched in one spot as well. So he decides to then get a prescription for diazepam, which he believes is going to help him because what happened to him in the shower, he is surmising to be a case of anxiety that caused him to lose control over the motor functions in his body. So there's even a joke as to how diazepam used to be called Valium. It's just like, Tim, hears diazepam and he's just like, oh, you mean Valium? Well, it's called diazepam now. Oh, thank you so much, director Michael Shanks, for reminding me about the 1990s and the early 2000s when I myself actually used to take what was called Valium back in the day, except I took it for sleeping. Another psychic phenomena happens while Tim is waiting for the train to pick him up for band practice. Millie is the one who drives him over and tells him, don't be in a rush to come home. Just have some fun, jamming out, enjoying the after party. Now, I do have to zero in on that line of dialogue that Millie makes. It's important to interject here a note with regards to the different needs that the couple have been having and that have been creating this distance, this chasm that has been keeping the two apart. It's like they feel so far away from each other, but yet they're living under the same roof. And now, of course, I had noted earlier in my review how Tim was obsessed with his music. You know, he's been trying to, get back into the routine of writing music for his band. You see a scene where he's sitting at his computer and he's recording demos on GarageBand or whatever. Whereas Millie has been trying to bring in more of a simple domestic element to the relationship because she's always asking for him to cuddle with her and to have sex with her. There is even a point where they're having dinner with Jamie, in which he spills out how he feels trapped by Millie. Where Tim says that he feels trapped by Millie. So that's what prompted Millie to tell him while he's at the train station to not be in a hurry to come home. Well, anyhow, Tim is at the train station when an actual anxiety attack starts creeping in, and his legs start to feel numb. He starts beating his fists against his legs. He's trying to get up and trying to get himself ready to board the train. But instead, he gets up, he leaves his guitar, amp, and jacket behind, and is walking in a feverish trance over to Millie's school. I mean, it looks like he's really sick. And when Millie is looking through the window of her classroom and she sees Tim walking through the playground with all these kids during the recess, she obviously feels a little bit distressed, wondering, it's like, oh gosh, all these kids must be wondering, who's this creepy old adult doing here? you know, and she comes up to Tim and is shocked, to say the least, that he just decides to ditch going to rehearse with his band. But Tim, um, while he did imply that he felt trapped by Millie before, now he's saying, "Oh, gosh, I felt so thirsty not being without you. But now that I'm here, I don't feel that way anymore." I wonder if that's kind of a bit of a tongue-in-cheek jab at the whole metaphor for thirst trap. This is 2025 after all, remember. And now this is where Tim really starts to have a pivotal moment in his relationship with Millie. He actually gets horny for the first time ever, and begins to have sex with Millie in the bathroom stall of the boys' bathroom, like absolutely nailing her against the wall, inside the bathroom cubicle. And she's absolutely ecstatic and overjoyed with pleasure. I mean, you could tell she was really, really warming up quickly to Tim making this spontaneous advance on her. Except that, well, I did mention that there was going to be a a physical phenomena as well that was connected with this. The psychic phenomena was him experiencing that magnetism to come back to Millie instead of going off to band practice. But now, as he's having sex with her, she's like, obviously, well, thank you. I've only been waiting like 10 years for this, which is great and all. Oh my gosh, except that Tim's penis is stuck inside Millie's vagina. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh man, the thirst trap alert right there. Oh, he was thirsty for her, all right, including his manhood. Anyways, I'm not laughing at him, and I mean I'm not saying that this is funny at all. I really feel sorry for these two. Oh, they are like she so desperately wanted him to finally have sex with her, but now he's discovering how much it hurts, seeing that now he has to pull his junk outside, out of her pussy. Oh, jeez. Oh, and then one of the boys signals Jamie to come in and check in on the perceived sexual activity that's going on in the bathroom cubicle. Tim, of course, has to hide as best as he can. And then Jamie, is having a dialogue with Millie saying, you do know this is the boys' bathroom and all that, yada, yada, yada. And then points out that there's blood dripping down her leg from her vagina, in which, he starts advising her to clean up before coming back to class. He basically thinks that she's on her period. That's the context that is being framed here. So basically, it's like it's only at the last second when Jamie starts walking out that he turns back and then just starts seeing Tim's shoe step down on the floor. Yeah, it starts seeing his leg coming down on the floor. So he knows that something's up between these two. Something, you know, totally unnatural. But um yeah, we're obviously going to get to Jamie's part in this story in a little bit, and how he starts getting drawn in more and more closer to this couple, and the imprint that he leaves on them during their stay there. Now, I'd like to take some time in this review to talk about Jamie here. He is the third side of the triangle, the third part of the triad who charges up and gives electricity to the story and the themes that are evoked in the narrative of Tim and Millie's relationship. During his visit to the couple's house for dinner, they bring up their adventure in the cave and mention the pews and the bell and with the sun engraving on it, which is at the mouth of the hole that Tim fell through in the cave. Um, Jamie, okay, so Jamie mentions that there used to be a New Age church there. And this is a church that ties in with the story that Jamie apparently tells his kids that is based on Plato's Symposium. These the story that's told in the Symposium is how we were once androgynous beings with 4 arms and 4 legs, and Zeus, who feared our power, was the one who split us in half, which is, the reason why people like me, very, very emotional, feeling, like intuitive type of men who, just have a tendency to feel everything, feel this fate to constantly search for my other half. I absolutely believe in that. And it's amazing how I happened upon Plato's Symposium here because there's a whole outline on Wikipedia regarding Aristophanes' speech going into greater detail than what Jamie tells in the movie. And it's quite fascinating, to say the least. Okay, so trust me, you're going to thank me later on this because I doubt that there is ever going to be a DVD or Blu-ray release where there is a bonus feature talking about Aristophanes' speech. So I'm going to read off to you what it says on Wikipedia here because it is too fascinating. And I'm not even going to post the link for this because I doubt that anybody is even going to want to click on the link. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people with ADD out there watching my reviews. So I am going to get a little bit preachy here, but only because I love this speech and how it is definitely a cornerstone to this movie. Yeah. So it reads, before starting his speech, Aristophanes warns the group that his panegyric to love may be more absurd than funny. His speech gives an explanation of why people in love say they feel whole when they have found their love partner. Oh boy, and I can, relate to that from experience a million times over. He begins by explaining that people must understand human nature before they can interpret the origins of love and how it affects their own times. This is, he says, because in primal times, people had double bodies with faces and limbs turned away from one another. So, henceforth, the painting that I just showed you, that I'm actually going to show you in just a little bit here. As spherical creatures who wheeled around like clowns doing cartwheels, these original people were very powerful. There were three sexes, male, female, and hermaphrodite. They were said to have descended from the sun, the earth, and the moon, respectively. These creatures tried to scale the heights of Olympus and planned to set upon the gods. Zeus thought about blasting them with thunderbolts, but not wanting to deprive himself of their devotions and offerings, so he decided to cripple them by chopping them in half, in effect, separating each entity's two bodies. Ever since that time, people run around saying that they are looking for their other half because they are really trying to recover their primal nature. Case in point, John Lennon and Yoko Ono. It does not get more representative than that. If you want like the top notch pop culture example right there from a real life couple. The women who were separated from women run after their own kind, whence lesbians. The men split from other men also run after their own kind and love being embraced by other men. Or, yeah, so of course there is typically a little bit of LGBTQ in here, but I still stand by my example of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Halves of hermaphroditic wholes are the men and women who engage in heterosexual love. Aristophanes says some people think homosexuals are shameless, but he praises their confidence, courage, and manliness. Only homosexuals. The term here refers to men who are involved in pederastic love, prove to be real men in politics, and many heterosexuals are adulterous and unfaithful. Aristophanes then claims that when two people who are separated from each other find each other, they never again want to be separated. This feeling is like a riddle and cannot be explained. Aristophanes ends on a cautionary note. He says that men should fear the gods and not neglect to worship them, lest they wield the axe again and we have to go about hopping on one leg, split apart once again. The speech has become a focus of subsequent scholarly debate. It is seen sometimes as mere comic relief and sometimes as satire. The creation myth Aristophanes puts forward to account for sexuality may be read as poking fun at the myths concerning the origins of humanity, numerous in classical numerous in classical Greek mythology. Yeah. All right, yeah, so there were some points in that speech that I disagreed with, but for the most part, I can definitely relate to the values that are brought up in that speech. Now it's revealed that the walls of the church actually have paintings containing exactly what was explained in that speech about, the two humans being fused together with their limbs and their faces facing away from one another. And this painting that I'm showing you here, while it is an interpretation of Plato's Symposium, it's not the painting used on the church walls in the movie. I I'm having a hard time finding, the source, finding source material showing photos of those paintings. They are very, very hard to find. But from the Greek painting that I'm just showing you here, you will get an idea as to what Jamie is talking about. So you can see that this church's cosmology was literally based on the idea of soulmates or twin flames. And Jamie himself mentions his partner and their involvement with that church. He even has a wedding video that was made, which, I'll get into the details more about that later. The philosophy that you can be so immersed emotionally in another that you aim to become one and not literally, and not, and literally bringing flesh to something that was always a fleeting metaphor. Again, the John Lennon and Yoko Ono example that I brought up, it was like, you know, Lennon himself looked at Yoko as if she was a goddess and he was a god. And the, you know, their the the connection with divinity as they see it was in the tantric Taoist like vibe that the two had for each other. It was like their love was holy. It really, really transcended the limitations brought on by the separateness that, we live in this world as a result of what Zeus did to us. It's like John and Yoko were able to heal that chasm between one another. Now, up to this point, I've already described supernatural happenings where Tim is actually the first to be triggered, which basically makes him the active polarity and Millie the passive polarity. But things get reversed one night when Tim is looking deeper into the story of the disappearance of the couple at the beginning of the movie. So, yes, Tim happens to have this curiosity now that leads him into researching into the missing couple who go by the names Simon and Carrie. And he's discovered that, well, okay, so the thing is that he's doing this research to figure out exactly if there are any similarities as far as the events leading up to their disappearance and the events that led up to Tim and Millie ending up in that cave. Oh, by the way, fun fact, director Michael Shanks is the one who plays the husband, Simon, in the photo that Tim looks at when he pulls up the Facebook page for the couple. And yes, much to Tim's surprise, but not mine, obviously, since I already could connect the dots by this point, they disappeared near where Tim and Millie live. Obviously, down the same hole and into the same cave. And then just as Tim is, discovering the coordinates between where they disappeared and where Tim and Millie are, the internet loses signal mysteriously. And then that's when Tim starts hearing this banging at the glass divider door behind him, where he turns around and sees Millie with a bloody nose now and her body up against the door, slightly levitating about a foot above the ground, just as Tim is also getting up out of his chair to come help her. So now the polarity is reversed. With now Millie, and her face slammed against the door, and now she's got a nosebleed, so there's like blood smearing all over the door. So it's like as he's getting up, her body is moving up against the door as he stands up. And then as he opens the door to let her in, she falls to the floor and starts convulsing in seizures. Tim even has to slap her to wake her up out of her hypnagogic trance. And then when she wakes up, she starts freaking out and even starts getting scared and paranoid with Tim, towards Tim. So this is when things start to get serious. And that's when they have to sit down at the table to have a conversation about everything that's been happening to them up to this point. Because now the emotional stakes have reached such a spiked level of intensity that now it's like this couple is afraid of being with each other. So they're sitting down, they're trying to make sense of what happened the night that they fell into that cave. Now, Tim, being that he is the poet and the songwriter in the couple, believes that there is, in fact, a magnetism that became alive after the couple slept in that cave overnight. It's like now these telekinetic occurrences have been unleashed. And there is a connection, apparently, with the pool of water that both Tim and Millie were drinking from as well to keep themselves hydrated. And, so Tim is making all these observations that it's like she's very magnetic and not in a very metaphorical sense, but in a very literal sense. But of course, Millie, who is more literal and real world oriented, is just like, no, I won't hear any of this. I won't believe this at all. She even tells Tim that she's now made up her mind about inviting her parents over to have lunch over the house. She doesn't want him to be present when her parents are over. So yeah, he's really being pushed to the edge here, pretty much, to the point where she's almost ready to throw him out of the house. And then as she leaves to go to bed for the night, a stream of blood from Millie's nosebleeds starts moving in a strange, slightly angled, but mostly straight line towards Tim on the table, hinting at more of the magnetic polarity function, almost as if that line was forming a compass, like a GPS towards him, like they actually share a mutual blood tie. Still, things escalate from there as Tim is now forced to sleep on the couch in a separate room from Millie. The magnetic force becomes more intense than ever, with Tim and Millie being literally drawn towards each other. Yes, they both try as hard as they can to resist it. Just constantly, like even Millie even makes these contortionist, like somersault type um, movements, and try as they might to resist it. They keep getting pulled towards each other until their hands touch, and then their skin and their bones start crawling up each other's arms. Yeah. it's oh yeah. Tim even has to get Millie to reach the diazepam, assuming that it's just another anxiety episode, which can be alleviated by taking a couple of capsules of diazepam. And it sorta works, except that by the next morning, their arms are still stuck, and Millie is now having to use the electric saw to cut them apart. Though that part wasn't quite as gruesome, to say the least. And it's like it just flirts on the edge of being body horror, but not really as in your face as much. So Millie is now prepared to visit the hospital, because she believes that they're sick. However, she left her keys over at Jamie's house, which, she visited earlier. She goes over to Jamie's house, hoping that he's going to be there. And that's when she enters this back room, which is all dark except for the glow of the TV showing Jamie's wedding video. Yep, so we've finally now reached the last 20 minutes or so of this movie. And now this is when it is revealed what the rituals of the church were that Jamie was a part of. What Millie comes to discover when seeing the wedding video is quite shocking. And shocking, really, because for what she sees in this video, despite having, religious overtones to it, is actually close to understanding the mysteries of what it is to be up close with another person's humanity when in a relationship with that person. She sees a group of these congregation members entering the church in the wedding video. And this is before it collapsed and I guess got swallowed up by a sinkhole in the earth where its remains became scattered in the cave for, Tim and Millie and, even Simon and Carrie, the first couple that went missing in the beginning of the movie. I'm sure they obviously saw this too. The pool that Millie and Tim drank from is shown here in the tape. to be a sort of baptismal water for which Jamie and his gay partner drink from. And then there is the priest who wears this brass ring or bracelet that contains these two sharp knife points, kind of like snake fangs, like cobra fangs. And they're like these two fork points on it. And so as Jamie, or I guess his partner, takes the arm of the other, um in basically giving their nuptial rights in marriage, the priest moves his hand down his arm and slits him, so causing these two deep cuts in his arm, like teeth from the knife points, which then eventually cause him to bleed. And then I believe this also happens to Jamie. He also subjects him to this bleeding, this cutting his arm. And then when the two hold each other's hands, they fuse their arms together, and the cut basically like causes the open cut becomes this part for which the other person essentially becomes a host, resulting in the two separate bodies becoming one. They are not able to unattach themselves from each other at this point. So this is when Millie gasps while witnessing this. And just then, Jamie enters the room and finally reveals, well, essentially why, you know, his discussion about Plato's Symposium was tied into the cosmology that this particular church believes in. It's like, gosh, oh gosh, I really wish I knew what particular religion this church was based off of. I mean, it's probably, jabbing at the whole New Age community the way that Beyond the Black Rainbow was doing with the 60s counterculture movement. And it's now that you start to notice something strange about Jamie's face. It's like you can see a synthesis of facial features combining his and his husband's face. Like he is living inside Jamie and or vice versa. And so this is where you see how becoming so in love with somebody and the warmth that you feel, as Jamie describes it, especially when he's telling Millie how warm she feels around him, the warmth that you feel and the empathy you share because the start of a new beginning where each partner becomes a gateway into a shared universe of mystery. Now, the question is, do you actually know at that moment that this is the one for you? This is what is revealed for the last 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, which in which you finally see, like, Simon and Carrie are finally revealed at this point. And it happens when Tim goes back down into the cave. um I forget why he does this, but you get to see what happened with Simon and Carrie as a result of this fusing process. And then later, towards the very, very end of the film, like the last 2, 3 minutes of the film, you get to finally see what becomes of Millie and Tim. You get to see the real self appearing under the skin. Ha ha ha! I just referenced the Scarlett Johansson movie from A24, which came out in 2013. And you get to see how the emotional energy reacts when two lovers actually bond. bond and how real or fake their values were for one another. It's like the final threshold that each of these lovers crosses through, which can either result, in macabre tragedy, which is where the body horror element comes into play, and or whether, the two actually become one as a part of their own personal Tao. Well, yin and yang, positive and negative, masculine and feminine, like the essentially, polarities are finally one in this moment. So this is where I am going to refrain from analyzing this film any further and leave the rest up to you, the viewer, to watch. Only because I know the very last few minutes of the film, at least the last 10 minutes of the film, are pretty predictable in the sense of what other people have already talked about. And I don't want to be predictable in the things that other people have said regarding the horror aspect of this film, because it's too black and white for me to really dismiss this as a horror film. It's really not. It's a love story as well. And the ending of the movie is unbelievable. And I just want to leave off this review with a sense of wonder. Especially because I wish that the movie would have gone deeper into the lore of the New Age cult, and especially what was the symbolism regarding the sun engraving on the bells. Like, oh gosh, I really wish I would have, been able to get a segment of the story that explains that even further. But it's this film really does, end with a lot of amazing questions that just linger long after this movie is over. That, are, that really, really get into the deepest, most primal aspects of the psyche. Both individually and in the mutual core. There's a Bjork reference right there. The collective, the personalized psyche that occurs within a relationship. I mean, let's be honest here. It's not easy to talk about love when it comes down to it. And you find there are things that come to the surface that can frighten you when your significant other worships you as the other half that you have been missing all along. I still bring up the example of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Well, the revelation Tim comes to understanding at the end of the movie is that his adolescent dreams of becoming a rock star may not have worked out perfectly, but in the end, Millie was the prize. He didn't need anything else in life to give him purpose. She is his purpose. And he even repeats the same gesture with the fake wedding ring box by opening his hands the way that Millie did at the beginning of the movie. I think it's wrong to project any paranoid delusions of gaslighting and assume that Tim should have offed himself, because that's just inhuman and evil and wrong. It's a movie that stares straight into the subconscious unflinchingly and can hopefully offer ideas to chew on and contemplate as a way to improve your own relationship with your significant other, or whatever poetic title you use as a way of exalting the other. Boyfriend, girlfriend, hubby, my man. It's like husband, wife. There's a zillion words to describe, to put a label on it, at the risk of trying to be like Joseph Gordon-Levitt in 500 Days of Summer. Bottom line, we were never meant to live alone on this planet. And I stand strongly by that belief that we each are meant to walk a path with a special someone to teach us to appreciate life and give only positive vibrations to this world. Hope this movie review leaves you with that in mind. And with that, I say ciao. Hope you enjoyed the review of Together 2025.